Just in the last few weeks, there's been about 5,000 to 6,000 employees fired from our federal government that work for the National Park Service, the BLM, the U.S. Forest Service, and other agencies as well. And I believe this is in an effort to undermine one of America's long-standing great traditions, and that is our public lands. But first, we need to take a few steps back, and I want to lay a little bit of groundwork for what is actually happening right now within our public land system. Let's take a walk. Right now, about 28% of the U.S. is considered public land, and that's across Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, and others, such as Fish and Game. This looks like about 85 million acres of land across our whole national park system, as well as 244 million acres of BLM land, or land without forests on it. This also looks like 95 million acres of land managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department, which looks like wildlife refuges, fisheries, wetlands, and a lot more. Most of this land is in the western states: Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, and of course Alaska. And there are others, but that's the dominant place of where this land is right now. Now, there's a good chance that no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, you actually really do enjoy our public lands. So places like this where I am right now are great for recreating, for hunting, for fishing, for RVing, for camping, for taking your kids, for taking your grandkids. Now, this is actually one of America's long-standing great ideas, long considered our best idea, is the fact that we have national parks, that we have public lands that are set aside for future generations to enjoy, to not just exploit for the here and now today. Now, the idea of our national parks and our national forests and wilderness areas being set aside, that was actually a controversial thing when they were first being implemented. These ideas were seen as an impediment to our nation's ability to grow, to establish our dominance, to create industry and jobs and economy.
You see, in the late 1800s, it was actually a novel idea to set land aside and to protect it from our own greedy desires, to extract every last ounce of profit. And the establishment of our national parks, national forests, and national monuments assured that at least some of our land and their ecosystems would endure for the benefit of all people, for generations to come.
Now, once the national park system was first established, it actually became wildly popular, and it became obviously a good idea. That has been from left to right, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, our public lands are extremely popular. So what's actually happening today? Trump and Doge and people like Elon Musk are saying we need a smaller, slimmer government. The Republican or more right-leaning argument is that the federal government is this lumbering, bureaucratic, kind of bloated agency that just is slow-moving, gets in the way of industry, gets in the way of progress. And on some sense, I don't think that they're necessarily wrong. The federal government is this huge, massive thing, and it is slow-moving. But that's not all bad. And in fact, some of those things actually protect places like this. So Trump put out some language recently saying that he wants to exploit our resources, and using the literal word exploit. And the idea here is that there is valuable resources on our public lands. But it's important to know that this public land does not mean that no business is happening, that mines can't happen, that logging doesn't happen. And in fact, right now, a huge amount, billions and billions of dollars of business is happening on our public lands.
To be clear, only a small percentage of our public lands are protected in such a way that completely prohibits development, mining, and logging. The vast majority of our public lands can be developed with oversight, balancing environmental concerns, fragile wildlife habitats, healthy ecosystems, and, of course, recreational use by the public. The complaint from the extractive industries is that the process to get leases is too slow, and some of the lucrative locations are protected by laws regarding endangered species, clean air and water, and other concerns of the public's well-being. Firing individuals in the agencies that provide oversight and the employees who do the physical work in the field is all part of the plan so that private companies can get freer access to the resources they crave.
It's not as if this federally managed land is being held hostage and it can't be used, people can't enjoy it, businesses can't grow and develop here. That's not what's happening at all. But here's what is happening, is now Trump has decided to fire about 5,000 to 6,000 employees of our federal government that oversee national parks, that are managing our public lands in some capacity. A lot of that is the boots on the ground, the people that are maintaining our trails, that are cleaning up our restrooms. Now, for a lot of national parks, what it's going to look like is long lines to get into our national parks. We're already seeing this in places like Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and our highest visited national parks, as well as just like generally speaking, just less good experience. When you want to take your kids to a ranger-led walk through the national park, well, those people are no longer available and you can't take your kids to go do that. So yes, one thing that's going to happen is your experience in our national forests, our national parks, is just going to be less pleasant. You might not even be able to get access to some of these places that used to be well-maintained and well-cared for. What's also happening is our search and rescue personnel are being stretched thin. So rescues, and I personally have benefited from a national park employee being there, a ranger, to rescue a friend of mine who was in a medical emergency. And if those employees were gone, well, that would have been a whole other situation to deal with. And so I think the idea that, hey, let's just shrink the government a little bit, let's just make it a little tighter, let's just make things more efficient, on some level, I can totally see the merits of that. But here's the thing, is I actually think Trump and people like Elon Musk are being pretty disingenuous. And I think that there's actually something much deeper going on. And it isn't even that secret. I think Trump has actually been pretty outspoken with what his goals are. He wants to clear cut more of our forests. He wants to open up these lands like this for more oil and gas leases. He wants to dig for more uranium and basically just put our public lands in the hands of the private sector. As of today, Trump has already ordered the logging of over 280 million acres of our forests. Much of this would have to bypass, illegally go around the Endangered Species Act. Trump has installed the head of a lumber company to manage our forests. In a manner of speaking, Trump has fired our shepherds and hired wolves to guard the sheep. Now, I think that that's really dangerous. What the reduction in staff does, in effect, is it makes people's experiences a lot worse. So everything from like having much dirtier bathrooms, to trash on our trails, to just being physically open. Like a lot of these places, we're already seeing closures because the Forest Service, the national park employees, they can't manage it. And when people come in huge numbers, it tends to get destroyed and it tends to get overrun, especially in our most sensitive areas. I believe that part of this is actually by design. I think that what Trump and Elon Musk and Doge are doing is actually trying to erode trust in our institutions, in our government. People like Trump and Elon Musk are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. They are candid about saying how bad the government is, that it doesn't work. And in fact, they're going into work every day trying to make sure that the government doesn't work. They're basically trying to make it come true that our government doesn't really work that well. By firing these people and making it less efficient or working worse, it makes us feel like, wow, government really isn't working. And then they can turn over and say, all right, because government's doing such a bad job of managing these things, let's turn these over to private industry. Let's turn our forests over to the timber companies and the lumber companies. I get that people don't necessarily have a great love for our federal government all the time, but at least their role is to seek out what's best for the people of our nation. Whereas private companies, their only goal is their bottom line and their shareholders. So if you are asking these companies to be good stewards of our land, well, they're just not going to be. So managing our forests and managing these lands like a private company would is not in our best interest because these people are making decisions for what's best for this quarter, this year, while they have the job of CEO. One of my favorite authors is Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she is a botanist, a scientist, and an indigenous woman, and she has some really wonderful insights, and I thought I would share something. Prosperity gained through individual accumulation and prosperity gained through sharing of the commons underpin the history of colonization in this country. The whole enterprise of dispossession and assimilation of the original peoples was designed to eradicate the notion of land as a source of belonging and replace it with the idea that land is nothing more than a source of belongings. This required a narrowing of the definition of well-being from commonwealth to individual wealth, from abundance to scarcity. She writes later, "I lament my own immersion in an economy that grinds what is beautiful and unique into dollars, converts gifts to commodities in a currency that enables us to purchase things we don't really need while destroying what we do." The idea that our public lands are for sale, that are used for short-term profit, is really just not very bright. It makes so much sense that we manage these lands in a way that is going to be better for future generations, that these are ecosystems that are interconnected with other ecosystems, with our own tangible lives. When our waterways are polluted, when the air that we breathe isn't as clean, we suffer. Yes, so $1 in your pocket today is great, but if that comes at the cost of tomorrow or of your children, well, then that's not so great. It's really quite short-sighted. So just before coming out here, Trump put out an executive order saying that we need to log 280 million acres. And a lot of this, to effectively do that, we'd have to bypass a lot of the Endangered Species Acts and some various protections that are already going on in these lands. Some of Trump's language here is saying like, hey, we actually can do a better job of managing our forests if we log more aggressively and to clear cut these areas so that they're not prone to wildfires. And the problem is that the science doesn't really back that up. Our old growth forests are the most resilient to forest fires because they have actually been able to mature in such a way that forest fires are much less effective at rampaging through and destroying everything. I do understand that as a society, we need to be able to build homes, build communities. That does require wood and lumber. And I also think that our forests do need to be cut in some capacity. Strictly having no cutting whatsoever actually is not the best method to preserving our forests. It is a balance, but certainly going in and cutting the most valuable forests, our old growth forests, is not the solution. Now, where I'm standing is an area just outside of Bears Ears National Monument, which he's also desiring to reduce the protections on so he can open this up to uranium mining. So it's not just logging. And uranium mining, while in one sense, we do need uranium for things like nuclear power and things like that, we also need to understand that these mines have a way of poisoning the communities that live here. So right now, the Intertribal Coalition, the 5 tribes that have worked really hard to make Bears Ears National Monument a place that was honored, a place that was deemed worth protecting for the cultural history as well as the iconic beauty of this landscape. Well, Trump set out to reduce that by 85% in his first term, and he's currently trying to make Bears Ears once again open for mining. Now, the problem is anybody who understands the way that these systems work, while these look barren and maybe lifeless, there is full of life happening, as well as the people who live here. Now, the communities that live in these areas are the most likely to suffer the effects of uranium mines, who tend to not be the most clean, that tend to poison our water systems. A rainstorm here, where these mines are, is going to lead into the San Juan River, which is just on the other side of me, that also flows into the Colorado River, which is the water source for millions and millions of people of the Southwest. The risk of contamination and poisoning these waterways is significant. And the people who are at most risk are the people who have been the most taken advantage of in our U.S. history, of course. We currently use our public lands for timber and logging. We currently use it for mining, whether that's oil and gas or various rare earth minerals. When it's federally managed, it means that the federal government is making decisions managing both profit and recreation and future generations and ecosystems and the environment. When things are managed by the state, literally written into the law is the obligation to increase profit, not for conservation, not for recreation, not for the public good, but profit. What's best for the bottom line of the state? There is something called land swaps, and this is a little bit technical, but it is a reality of what's happening. So right now, I am in a huge swath of federally managed land. However, there's these little squares and quadrants all over this state, like a checkerboard of land managed by the state of Utah. So Utah can actually go in and trade federal land for state land because they say, hey, that piece of land over there has something that we want, whether that's a good piece of forest that they can cut, or whether that's maybe minerals or something to mine. So let's take a look at the map here. So right now I'm pulling up my Onyx, and I can see a map of this land. There is a checkerboard of squares all throughout this wilderness area, national monument area, as well as BLM land that is currently state land. And what's managing it is known as SITLA. SITLA, and that is Utah's land agency that operates these lands for profit. When I'm looking on these maps, I can see how much of this land is actually available to develop. There's actually quite a lot. Take a look at all of those squares. So right now I'm looking at a map that is provided through Onyx Backcountry. And Onyx has actually been a sponsor of my channel for quite some time, and they're making it possible for me to come out and make these kinds of videos. Now, Onyx is a great map app service. I use Onyx all the time for planning my hiking and backpacking trips, but it's really cool because their map system is really fantastic. And one of the things I really love about it is the ability to see exact land designation, land status, whether it's National Monument, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, wilderness area, or whatever it might be. And right now, if you want to check Onyx out, go to the link below and you can save 20% on a membership. I've been using Onyx Backcountry for years, even before they were sponsoring my channel here, and they are the best app and map navigation service I've ever used. So check them out at the link below, and let's get back to our discussion on public lands. I think one of the fundamental misunderstandings that's always happened is most of these decisions about public lands is made in Washington or places that are far removed from landscapes like this, where the touch points just aren't there. Those decision makers, the lobbyists, the congressmen, the senators, the president, probably has very little or almost no understanding of what's truly out here and what's at stake. So I know that this is like a different kind of video than I'm typically making. I typically don't really talk about politics. And you might be thinking, hey, hiking and backpacking, they're not really political. And in a vacuum, hiking and backpacking isn't political. But the real thing is that we need lands to go hike and backpack on. And how land is managed is deeply political. And that's why I feel compelled to make this video, to have this conversation with you. And I'm truly not trying to be divisive. I'm trying to explain what I think is happening. And if you care about land like this, like I do, then it's under our obligation to speak up, to share our opinion, to express what we believe in. I'm standing in one of the most insanely beautiful places on the planet that very few people know about, trying my best to spread the word that this place is absolutely worth protecting. So this begs the question, what do we do? How do we help? If we care about these lands and what's happening, what is the best way to help? That is a tricky thing. I think honestly, one of the best things that we can do is be vocal. For me, it's to make a video, to share, to express my opinion, and to stand up and fight for these public lands. I deeply love these places. I want to be able to take my kids someday to explore a place like this without it being a uranium mine, without it being a clear-cut, devastated forest. I am honestly getting a little bit emotional right now, which I didn't expect to, because I truly love landscapes like this. And I feel like more people need to experience it. More people need to touch our soil, to go literally touch a tree and see what is at stake here. And I know that that sounds so hippy-dippy, and I'm sorry, but the reality of it is that without clean air, clean water, forests that recirculate our air and turn our carbon dioxide into something breathable, it's like we wouldn't be here. Being vocal is step one. The more public support that we show for our public lands, the harder it is for our politicians to sell these lands off to private companies. The more we speak up and the more that we show up in favor of these places, the more that they will be protected. And in fact, I think one thing that is great about what's happening with social media and videos and YouTube is that people are coming to understand these places better. A place like Bears Ears, where I am right now, that hasn't typically been very understood. And when nobody knows what's in these places, it's a lot easier for the mining companies and the executives to get what they want because people don't really know what's at stake. And I hope that by showing you what's at stake or participating in showing what's at stake, it might lead to greater understanding, as well as a motivator to protect places like Bears Ears National Monument, or our Bureau of Land Management here in Utah, or the forests of Arizona and Idaho and Washington and Alaska. I think another thing that we can all do is visit these places with care and respect. So when you're going into your national parks this summer, obviously just making sure that we are respectful to the people that are working hard to make it possible, leaving no trace, not leaving trash behind, and understanding that these employees might be stretched thin right now. I think we can also do things like show up politically in our local level. I think that's super, super important. Making your voice heard and standing up for your local trails, your local wilderness area, or whatever it might be. This isn't just about who's the president of the United States. A lot of these actual decisions and management decisions happen at the local level. So if you truly care, showing up to city council meetings and expressing your opinion that way. Now, for a place like here, there's also agencies that do a really good job of keeping people informed of what's going on. So for where I'm at, the Bears Ears Coalition is somebody that I pay attention to have a greater degree of understanding of what's actually happening in the land where I'm at right now. Also, I would say call your representatives. And if you want, there is a number in the description below that is going to give you a number to call, literally a switchboard in Washington to call to say, hey, I want these places protected. And your public vote in that capacity really makes a huge difference. And as well as, I think, actually getting out and exploring these places, going and hiking and camping and being a visitor here, the more people that actually understand what's at stake, what these lands are, the better. I am actually a huge proponent of coming and visiting these lands, of coming and being a user of these lands, because a place like Bears Ears, when nobody knows what's here, it's much easier for those interested parties to get what they want, because there's fewer people to stand up and say, hey, I love that place. I want to protect that place. I want to fight for that place. One thing that I wanted to do is have a list of organizations in the description below that I think are doing good work. Some of these organizations are actually going to court to protect our clean air and our clean water, and to make it so that it's harder for these companies to dump sewage or to clear cut or to go around environmental protections. The main thing that I want for people is to just feel like they have an involvement and not feel just totally overwhelmed with the news, which makes you kind of just feel numb and like you can't do anything. Well, your voice matters. Here's the thing. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear what your opinion is on this topic. And honestly, I'm trying to be as fair as I can with all of this. So no matter which side of the equation that you lean on, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your opinion. And yeah, let's try to make these places good for not only yourselves, but for future generations. It feels a little bit funny for me to be sharing my opinions on this because it's not something I've really done. But at the same time, I feel like it's deeply important for us all to stand up and share and talk about things that are really important to us. And places like Utah and the BLM and our national forests and, of course, our national parks are really important to me. So thanks so much for taking the time to watch this. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Thanks so much. I'm Eric Hanson. I'll see you later, everybody.